All right, I'll get started. Whoops, here we go. Really start from the start. My name is Matthew Conway. I'm a lead product security engineer on Heroku at Salesforce. And I'm Matt reduced pretty much everywhere online. So if you have any questions and we don't have time for them, or you think of something later, just hit me up there on Twitter. Heroku, what I work on is on BugCrowd, and it's been there since 2014, I believe. So if you find anything wrong with any of our stuff, just let us know there. So yeah, today I want to talk to you about targeting, specifically for bug bounty research. And what I mean by that, why is this different from just finding hosts and dumping them into your notes and moving straight into enumeration and discovery, aka the fun part? So I call it targeting because I want to describe a more disciplined, systematic approach to finding the services that we want to test for vulnerabilities, and then deciding which to go after based on actual measurable criteria. So then we test the targets for vulns, and then we learn something from that process, and we keep feeding that back into what we know about targets. We start it all over again. And this is, all for the best results that we can hope for as vuln researchers. So you're going to need to focus on efficient and repeatable ways of finding those targets. Decide what kind of criteria you want to use to judge those new targets. Keep a list of them and their criteria somewhere that's portable, it's easy to update, and then put that info into use in your research. So keep everything you learned from that vuln research and just make good use of it. For this talk, we're going to be focused entirely on the earliest stage of the assessment or pen testing process that you can call the reconnaissance stage. So this is all about gathering information and not really about discovering vulnerabilities, unless that happens as a side effect, because it does sometimes. And yeah, when would you even get started with this? I would say, and pretty much everyone else I've read about this topic says, start with this first. Just because it's the first stage doesn't mean you do this up front and forget about it until later and you find a new bug bounty program to work on. This is about gathering very useful information, and then you continue to do that as you go. It would be pretty hard to describe a process that has infinite repeating stages, so we just say recon is first because you should start there if you want to succeed. Got it? Okay. So why are we spending time on this at all? Why aren't we just spending our time and effort on finding the vulns? Because this is about learning as much as you can about a bug bounty program's infrastructure and services, so that you don't miss a target or a vulnerability that was there all along, but you didn't do enough information gathering to find it. And then the more you find out, the better coverage that program owner is going to have, and the more likely that you'll find vulnerabilities that turn into actual quality submissions that reward you for the time you've been spending. And this thorough research that you're doing helps you gain the understanding of those targets that leads to really interesting findings. And those are actually the most valuable for both you and the program owners. So there are a lot of reasons to gather information or enumerate in the context of just security assessments in general. But for now, we'll talk about finding a target, or you can call them hosts or web services. We do this because before you find the problems, you need to find all the places they live. For some bug bounty program owners, that's a pretty simple process. But for many, I know our our infrastructure is fairly sprawling. So the service area is extensive. It's kind of easy to forget about sometimes, especially if you're the person setting up a bug bounty program and you're not someone that's in the thick of it, keeping up with engineering changes. And as a researcher, we're all going to be thinking about covering a program's marketing site, their blog, their admin dashboard, and anything else that's just obviously tied to the business. But are those always where vulnerabilities are introduced? Obviously not. You can find them wherever there's software running. and we all run a lot of software these days. So to be effective professionals at this and to make the most, financially out of bug bounty research, we're going to need to cast the net wide, so to speak, but without sacrificing quality and without losing lots of our time. So the enumeration methods we're going to cover in this pretty quick overview focus on discovering hosts or whole distinct services by using DNS information and some other open sources. Let's see. Hang on a sec. Okay.
Meme usage is on point.
Thank you. So far, so good. So there are a number of ways that that you could and should try to discover hosts. It's not just DNS based or simply trying a couple subdomains and seeing what works, which is kind of like brute forcing. Crafting the right Google queries. You should also be trying to get yourself into every beta or early access program you can join, so you have early notice when potential targets are introduced. The first method I want to talk about is DNS, first information source, that is. So some of your sources for finding these targets are going to be something that's practically built for that purpose, like DNS. So oftentimes DNS is just going to be an information source, but you should also still be on the lookout for vulnerabilities themselves that you can learn about through DNS. Pretty good example being subdomain takeovers. So you can find a subdomain that points to some service that's no longer being used, like some support ticketing service. You could try signing up for that service and getting that old subdomain pointed at your own instance. But you could even use that you could use DNS, misuse it, I guess, for exfiltrating data, command and control comms, if you're on assessments where that's appropriate. Let's see. Is it lagging? There we go. Yeah. You should also look on GitHub. Why would you do that? Developers mention potential targets for you in their code and in their documentation. Some of the tools that they build and release might actually call out to a target service behind the scenes without those APIs being publicly documented or even mentioned anywhere by them. You might even come across some development or staging services that have lower defenses. Rapid7's Project Sonar involves scanning the whole public internet and seeing what's vulnerable out there. If you think that's going to find some targets you might not have heard about yet, it's a pretty good chance there is. If it doesn't, just move on. Keep casting your net wide and use the next source. And remember to come back to each of these, the next time you start on a bug bounty program. Because your success with each one of these information sources is likely going to vary against each company. Google search is pretty straightforward. This is a great and standard source of not only the hosts themselves, but what software is running. Are there some pages with information that should be secret, but they got indexed? But this is going to be a good source for hosts as well. Google CT, that means Certificate Transparency Report. This is meant to safeguard the whole certificate issuance process by putting out there an open framework for monitoring and auditing HTTPS or TLS certificates. But we can use it to find hosts by getting records of the subdomains that the program company registered certs for through a cert authority. And in my opinion, this is a pretty great source of information during this stage. I also highly recommend that if a company with a bug bounty program offers some kind of early access or beta testing opt-in for new features, just jump on that. Learn about new services and features as soon as you can, and just test the heck out of them. Follow that company on Twitter, any other social media service that you're already on, and just keep up with that company and what they're putting out there. This is good for that company because their stuff has ideally had many eyes on it, not just from a UX perspective, but also security before it's even shipping. But that's also really good for you as a researcher, because you might be stumbling onto new territory here. If you feel like you've been struggling to find vulnerabilities that haven't already been reported or are fixed long before you got started, this source of info is going to give you a better chance at fresh vulns. and probably some money, right? But there's a lot of other, open sources out there that's, just go looking. It's not hard to find. Check out DNS Dumpster, Threat Crowd, Threat Miner, the HTTPS Everywhere Atlas. Yeah, and always look for new opportunities to repurpose some tool that you're using online that's maybe not really meant for discovering hosts, but repurpose it. So now we got some sources of info. I want to talk about some of the tools that you can use as you're gathering hosts, potential targets, that can even allow you to script some of this and automate it. One of your first tasks, like I said, is in finding hosts is going to be to fire up Google, enter site : the name of some domains that belong to that program's company, and they're in scope or they're not explicitly out of scope, and then just find results from targets on subdomains that aren't on your list yet. Then you got classic brute forcing using word lists. You can just take a list of common subdomains and just try them all. And you get bonus points if you expand your own word list, if you use terms that you found in crawling targets that you know about already. I highly recommend that you automate any of this along with everything else you can. If you're comfortable in a language like Python or Ruby, use those. If you just know Bash, use that. If you know PowerShell, use it. There are also DNS troubleshooting tools like Dig and Host, and they're meant more for sysadmins than pen testers. But we can take any good tools and make them serve our purpose, right? Check out these tools. Check out some tools called DNS Recon and DNS Enum for more purpose-built pen testing tools. Or just check out DNS Map, which will help you find subdomains that way, and comes with a built-in word list to start. The Alt DNS tool from Shubs will generate all kinds of permutations, alterations, and mutations of subdomains, and then resolve them and see if it works. You can use your word list with this tool also, which you have a word list by now, right? And while you're at it, you should read Shub's article, High Frequency Security Bug Hunting, 120 Days, 120 Bugs, if you haven't read that already. I also highly recommend checking out ReconNG. Highly, highly recommend that. This is more of a framework than a script. If you're already familiar with Metasploit, it's like that for information gathering and enumeration. Really take the time to learn that tool. And if you put ReconNG and AltDNS together, you get a little something from JHaddix you can find on GitHub under the project called Domain. If you've got a Google API key, with one command, you're off to the races. What a time to be alive. All right, so you've got lots of data from all the tools. What's next? You'll want to be all up in one document, typing really fast like this guy. Not really. It doesn't matter a whole lot which format you choose for recording your targets, but start thinking about something basic like a CSV file, or go for a SQL database. And then you can not only connect this to scripts, but to full-blown applications that work with your target data. Just get creative with it. But you're going to have to choose, what to store alongside, just the domain name of this target. What else do you care about? Hopefully if you've explored some of the targets already, you've gotten a sense for which of them are high and low value, or otherwise, are they likely to be important to the owner of the target, or do they have interesting vulnerabilities? Probably. Maybe you want to record the type of the target. Is it a website, a blog, forum, admin dashboard, an API, command line tool, or package software? Put a type field in there and just start checking that stuff in. But whatever you do, think hard for a bit about what you'd like to consider, when you're choosing the next target to work on, and then just keep that info in some place that gives you the flexibility to change what you're storing and how you store it, and makes it available on every device you might be using. The F3EA cycle, or find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze. Sometimes this also includes the D step, or disseminate. This is a military term or a concept that was coined around 2014. It prescribes like a targeting process for you to identify your targets, find where they are, keep an eye on them, act against that target, for example, capturing them. Gather and process any information that's made available to you during that act. If you find some documents, and finally learn from it. Analyze the intelligence you've got. And for our sake, we want to find new targets using those sources and tools that we covered, figure out what they do, what they're running, who really owns them, start looking for vulnerabilities, gather even more target data in the process, and then look at it all and decide whether these new targets or new hosts belong in your records, or if they give you clues on targets that you knew very little about before. So think about this cycle, start this, keep doing it, and don't stop. That's the point. Speaking of Shub's work, you should check out Asset Notes. This is another place you might consider storing your targets. It notifies you of assets that have been found through scraping some data sources, which is pretty cool. All right, so you're going to have some, in all this data that you've been collecting, you're going to have some data that you want to clean out before it's really useful. Think about reducing duplicates. What hosts are probably defunct, like in the certificate transparency report. You're going to, depending on what options you checked when you're running that search, you might get some information on certs that were issued for hosts that aren't there anymore. Also think about handling coming across different names for the same host or service. That can happen sometimes. And be open to context clues on every one of these hosts that you come across. Maybe one confirmed target is communicating with some host that you just discovered. This might indicate where a company is not following their domain rules that you assumed so far. So for example, Heroku, at my company, we're not supposed to run production services on food.herokuapp.com. It's supposed to be .heroku.com. But sometimes things ship and they don't get an official Heroku.com domain, so we can't really say 100% to ignore Herokuapp.com. You just have to take it on a case-by-case basis. Yeah, and a misstep like that on our part or someone else's part, that could help you discover vulnerabilities, or illustrate the risk that they pose, being on a different set or a different domain. Yeah, so if you want to validate, all this potential target data that you've got coming in, I'd recommend, writing some scripts to run against each host. Maybe take screenshots that you can review later. If there's just a ton of candidates and you want to whittle it down, and one of the only ways that you really can be sure is just by looking at the site and saying, okay, this obviously looks like it doesn't belong to company XYZ. Some other factors you should consider: what SSL certificates used by that host? Are there some common cookie names, like bugcrowd session or something like that you're seeing across lots of hosts? Some hosts, HTTP web services, they're going to have pretty distinctive header keys or values, meta tags, content fragments like a shared header and footer that's just present on all public properties for a company. Even logo images. If you see that image in the response, maybe there's a good chance it belongs to the same company. Do the same for copyright lines, copyright 2017, bugcrowd. If there's contact information in the footer, like an official Twitter account, that seems like a pretty strong indication of who that belongs to. And even look at Google Analytics tracking codes if they're reused across hosts. So yeah, I would just say, think about all these factors, try these out against a couple of different bugcrowd programs and see what you get. All right, so all of this information gathering is pretty fun, but it's time to get to work. Most of that is, kind of outside the scope of this talk, but there's a few points I want you to remember, once you're done doing all this collecting and analyzing. First thing is that target ownership can be a little complicated. Some companies like GitHub, Heroku, Status Page, we give out subdomains to our customers. These days, it's not as common to give out a subdomain on, say, the main domain that's officially used by that company. There's maybe a separate domain like github.io that gets used instead for those subdomains. But there's still, some potential problems that can come up with this, even for you as a researcher. It can be a source of confusion, or it actually might be a vulnerability that you find. Like before we talked about subdomain takeovers. Just bear in mind that because you're testing something on a subdomain of a domain that's in scope, that doesn't mean you're finding vulnerabilities that are even within the control of that program owner. And here's some examples. So if it makes sense, still gather these types of subdomains. Just look for some repeatable way of determining if it's owned by that program company. What appears to be a GitHub Pages site or a customer app from Heroku. Use all those factors I mentioned and just try to quickly whittle it down to what's official. To complicate things further, you might come across some subdomains owned by the program company that point to services that are not actually operated by them. And you won't really have the authorization to test these services. So look out for this as well. Make sure you always find out who really owns the host before you get down to business. Check the host against the program scope. That's pretty self-explanatory. It's something BugCrowd tells you to always do. Sometimes the hosts are explicitly listed as in scope. Sometimes they're listed as out of scope. But other times you're going to be finding hosts that could be a target. It just wasn't included in the list, but it's implicitly in scope based on what is said in the rest of the bug bounty brief. But before you get excited about a possible target, just spend a little bit of time rereading the program scope. Keep an eye on updates to their scope in case something changes months down the line. Maybe something's fair game now. Before you go further, just do your due diligence on a new host. Understand their purpose and their ownership. So what now? You got some valid in-scope hosts. You can test them out. You got real targets on record. You have set yourself up to do the best work you can, and you should reward yourself by starting to enumerate service on these targets. Look for vulnerabilities. The rest of this is covered pretty well in other talks you'll watch today and just everywhere on the internet. But remember that F3A cycle we covered earlier. As you go through vuln discovery, find some time to step back and do other tasks. Look at what your tools have picked up, in HTTP responses like in Burp or Zap. Are there new hosts that could be your next target? Just stay in this loop and keep learning, or else you're going to get tunnel vision and tunnel vision bad. All right, so here it is, condensed. Just find out everything you can. Keep the best notes that you can. Please respect, program scope. Remember those pitfalls that we talked about fuzzy ownership. And to save yourself some time and to really keep doing this continuously, automate as much as you can and vet things carefully. Thank you.
That was awesome, man. Thanks for presenting.
Thanks. Yeah, sure thing. Any questions?
Looking in the QA and chat. Applause, pretty standard. Everyone, it takes a lot of courage, I want to say, is one of the words I'm looking for, to get up here and present to this crowd, honestly. These are some really smart peers, people who hack on our programs that we run. To come here as a customer is really awesome. To come here as a bug hunter and share your secrets and methodologies and stuff is just, it's kind of what the whole conference is about, but it's hard. So I just want to thank our speakers for preparing material, coming here, sharing their ideas. It's pretty sick, and I know that I've learned like a ton today. Like I have a full notebook page of notes, and I got to go back over all the videos. So yeah, it's super cool. I've actually probably learned more in the 4 talks so far today than I have in the last 2 years, I think, of going to like real physical conferences like OWASP or something like that. So really like it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. If anyone thinks of anything else, like I said, I'm Matt Reduce.
Oh, we do have one, Matt. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah.
So it says Matthew mentioned about looking at Google tracking code across hosts. Could you explain why this is important or valuable?
Sure. So if you're reusing the same, I guess, identifier for your Google properties that you're using Google Analytics for, you're going to plug that same code into the fragment that goes in somewhere in your HTML body. I feel like this is a pretty strong indicator that this property also belongs to me. If I found that on www.company.com, if I find it out on some other host and it's I don't know, an admin portal for partners or something, and they're trying to track use Google Analytics for this property too, and it's the same tracking ID. I feel like there's probably going to be no one else putting that fragment in there unless they just blindly, you know, copied all of the HTML for a legit site belonging to that company XYZ, and they're trying to phish people. That's possible. Maybe they didn't remove that tracking code. But in my opinion, that should be a strong indication that it belongs to the same company.
Cool, man. Yeah, the other one I see a lot is as I Google search for strings in the trademark or the privacy policy for the main company, and then you'll find those privacy policies have to be included on any acquisitions or partner sites that they use or sites that they don't brand under their top TLD. So Google searching for those helps me out sometimes too. It's just like your idea for the analytics code as well. So
Nice.
yeah, cool, man. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you all. Yeah, really appreciate it.